Hi, I'm Melinda Van Fleet, and welcome to the Confident Conversations podcast. I'm an author, speaker, and success coach who helps women believe in themselves, build confidence, and take action. This podcast shares authentic and transparent, thought-provoking stories, tips, and tools from my experiences, as well as incredible guests, so you can continue to build your confidence and live your best life. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's get started on this confidence journey. Real quick before we begin, I am super excited about the release of my first book, Confidence Mastery for Couples, a roadmap to a more intimate relationship, and the book releases March 9th. Stay tuned for more about it and other confidence-related books that I will be releasing every 3 months, and there will always be a link in my show notes. Now on to the podcast. Welcome everyone to this week's Confident Conversations podcast. I am super excited that you are joining me and you made the decision to listen to my podcast because I know there's a lot of podcasts out there. So thank you in advance. I appreciate that. This week, I wanted to be bold and have the confidence to talk about podcast guesting. I have danced around this in the past, so I have mentioned it a few times here and there on some other podcasts, especially I believe when I talked about social media, because I did that for a couple podcasts in a row back in the fall. And it's pretty amazing about what I've learned about podcast guesting. So I wanted to share it, and I wanted to share it from the place of my learnings and my husband's learnings, what I see going on out there, that still people aren't paying attention to and listening and making changes, and just how to value yourself and set boundaries and have your own self-respect and protect your energy and your time. Because this keeps on going on, and I just think it's just a head scratcher for me sometimes at the end of the day. So both of my podcasts, Good Karma Success Coach and this podcast, are part solo and part guests. To be really honest, I feel good about not having some black and white strategy. Someone could disagree with me, but I feel good about that. I feel that when a guest comes across my path that I want to have on, I want to feel good about that. I want to have good energy around that connection, around that collaboration, around that relationship. I don't want to be forced into having someone on my podcast because I have to, because I do interviews. So if you look at all the podcasts out there, I'm sure you could scroll through your feed and really realize and see that the majority of podcasts are now interview podcasts. And there are more and more, I should say this the other way, there are less and less solo podcasts out there. And what I've found happening is everyone just jumps on bandwagons. So coaches and courses, webinars, they are teaching that in order to have podcast growth, in order to grow your audience, in order to monetize, you need to have interviews and have guests. And what happens in that energy is you are then expecting the guest to be promoting your podcast to their audience so you can get podcast growth. And there's also been all these companies that have been created, or podcast guest brokers, they have different titles, that have created a business for people to hire them to then they reach out to podcasts and ask for the podcast to have their client on their podcast. So there's all sorts of energy and emotions and thoughts tied up in all of that. So let's break it down. For these people that are brokers or agents or creating websites or Facebook groups, emails, clubs, communities for podcast guesting, you're missing this mark on true collaboration and building relationships and true sharing. You're just missing this mark. And it's very fascinating the amount of requests I get, the amount of messages on Facebook, LinkedIn. Now you respond to somebody on LinkedIn and automatically they email you within a minute. So my husband thinks actually that's a bot system that someone has created. But there's nothing there. Like most of these people, the majority, I'm going to be bold and say the majority have not listened to the podcast. Maybe they listened a little bit, but their time is limited and they're just trying to make the sale. So these agents are just going, oh, this looks like it could be. I kind of scrolled through. Okay, I'm going to reach out to this person. And that is still cold. I'll be really honest. That is still really cold. And unless your guest is some big superstar, like it's still really cold and still going to cause me to scratch my head and really look at it and go, I don't know. Because the thing that people need to realize is that podcast guesting, so me having guests on my podcast takes me 3 times minimal, 3 times as long in regards to my time to put that podcast out there, because I do research. I spend time back and forth with those emails, setting up a Zoom call. Then those conversations often take about an hour of my day. So I'm prepping for it. I have a little bit of chat before, a little bit of chat after. The podcast could be anywhere from 20 minutes to 40 minutes. So that's easily an hour. Then I have to download it from Zoom into GarageBand. And then I try really hard to do a nice job and create a graphic using wave.co and give it a little bit more attention even than when I do a solo podcast. A solo podcast for me literally takes 10 minutes about to record. It could go a little longer, but let's say on average 10 minutes. It's already in GarageBand. I upload it to Libsyn. Oh yeah, you always have to upload it to your platform, so that's time. And my show notes can be more simple because it's just coming from my brain versus looking at what someone might have sent me for a bio. Often these bios are super long, so then I have to chop it down and add something of value about the conversation into the show notes. And all their information and links, which is double the work than when I just do my own show notes for myself. So what people don't realize is all that time. So it kind of amazes me, all these people that are just creating podcasts with all these interviews that aren't really relationships. That's just kind of like a revolving door of interviews. And if that guest isn't promoting on their end, which is going to be the next thing we're going to talk about, then it's really just a big time suck, people. Like, think about it. Think about it. Think about all that time you're spending interviewing people, and then what did you get from it? So that's part 2, is that the majority of these podcast guests do not do a good job promoting your podcast. They just don't. And it's been quite an eye-opening experience and a lot of energy that I have had to let go. I have had to let go of the fact that the majority of people out there are not good on social media. They just aren't. Which then is a positive, and this is how I flipped it in my mindset for energy purposes, is a positive for the people like me that are good at promoting out there. Because, yeah, like, hi, let me take that space up on your feed if someone else isn't going to promote. So I'm just going to rely on myself and what I know I can do, and I can work 10 times harder than most people out there, so I can do a really good job of my own promotion. Hence, think about it. I've got 2 podcasts, and I also help my husband. So when you think about it that way and you flip it, then it kind of takes the pressure off. But circling back to my point is that you cannot rely on these other people that you're interviewing and spending time interviewing to promote your podcast. It just doesn't always happen. It doesn't. So now with my name title change to Confident Conversations from Crush It in Sales, I have a list of people that I know and have built a relationship with over the past year or so online that I know can now fit into this niche that I would love to have on the podcast because number one, I know they have a lot of value and would do a great job sharing that value and helping others, which is my main intention. And number two, I know they're out there on social media and I know that they'll help promote it. So it's not just going into this void vacuum of, yes, I had you on my podcast and you didn't even share it with anybody. And sharing is not as good as commenting or creating your own post, by the way, too. I've learned that and I've heard it from other marketing experts. So think about that. If you are one of these people and you just started a podcast and you took a course from someone, heck, some of these courses are a couple $1,000s, and they're saying this is the strategy and you need to find guests and you need to do this and you need to do that, and then they'll help you promote and you'll be able to promote to their audience. It doesn't really work like that. It's a smaller percentage. So be careful of what you're listening to. Because you also have to realize that if someone started their podcast 10 years ago, they started in a blue ocean. They started in a blue ocean. There is nothing wrong with that. I am not shaming these people. Kudos to them. But it's just something that if someone's starting now, you have to just realize that and maybe think about your strategy a little different. Because quite frankly, being a solo podcaster and having the content come to you and you can share the content that you wish to share and it fits and then it saves you a lot of time. I haven't seen any difference in podcast numbers from my solo episodes to ones where they're interviews. It is very rare if it is a difference. And sometimes it's smaller. The numbers are less when I have a guest, if the guest isn't resonating with my audience versus when it's just me doing solo. So I have a lot to say about this, actually. The other thing that I will say as a podcast listener is I personally enjoy listening to a solo podcaster because I'm following them. I want to hear their thoughts. I want to hear their stories. I want to hear their business ideas, their mistakes, their learnings, what they're working on. And when they have a guest, unless they can really interject, and sometimes you can and sometimes you can't, you often don't hear anything about the podcast host because it's really all about the interview, which is how it should be. Quite frankly, if you have someone on to interview, it should be about the guest. But think about it that way too. You're not really getting to know the podcast host. So if you're trying to build your own audience with your own tribe of people that know, like, and trust you, they're likely not getting the gist of who you are. And it's really fascinating. I'm going to circle to this podcast that was released this week, Patty Farmer's podcast, which is Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. And I'm also a columnist this year for her magazine. And I'm going to put this link in the show notes too, because this was cool. I was on her podcast and I loved being on her podcast. We had such an amazing conversation and she asked me so many awesome questions that a lot of people don't ask me. And a lot of things that I just don't bring up naturally in a solo podcast. So that podcast is one where you'll get to know me. So look in the feed, if you have someone you're following, look in the feed and put a search in by their name if you are someone that follows a solo podcaster or someone that does just interviews, and see if you can find a podcast out there where that person that you like and follow was interviewed on someone else's podcast, because you'll be amazed at all the golden nuggets and things that you will learn by kind of looking at it backwards. So yeah, I told you I had a lot to say about this. And the other thing I want people to really understand when I talk about solo podcasting is my husband, Ryan, Good Karma Sport Fishing, and he has the Good Karma Sport Fishing podcast. He is a solo podcaster. He has only had 2 guests on his podcast. Both of those podcasts were the lowest ranking podcasts he'd ever had. And he and I do a joint monthly podcast together. And that gets equal as his solo podcast, but I don't consider myself a guest. We just do that as a fun thing to share together as a couple because we really like to help couples out there. And his numbers are through the roof. This past month of January, it was crazy, and we thought December was crazy. He gets thousands and thousands of downloads a day, and he is a solo podcaster. Solo. And yes, sometimes they're fishing tips, sometimes they're fishing stories, sometimes they're mindset, sometimes they're challenges that he has to work through because he suffers from a lot of different things and he wants to help more people in that lane. But his podcast is solo. So you can have a successful solo podcast if you are looking to go that route. Mix it up. I highly recommend mixing it up. It gives you the flexibility to make choices, to set boundaries, to protect your energy, and to find people that you really wish to build a relationship with, collaborate with, and you feel has the right material for your audience. And one last thing that I'm going to share is just some examples that happened this week, because I do believe in sharing some concrete examples. So someone reached out to me on LinkedIn. It was through a connection that I had made a couple weeks ago, and it was a nice complimentary LinkedIn message. I responded back. I did not take the time, but I responded back saying, I'll look at your profile, but I just wanted to say thank you. Within literally a minute, she was trying to sell me her podcast guest client. Okay, you haven't listened to my podcast. You haven't looked at my feed. You haven't commented or liked any of my posts. You just went immediately into sell mode. You know what? That's not in my energy. That is not in my energy. The next person that reached out to me, she said some nice things about my podcast, which are great. And you never know how long someone's really listening, or if they listen to just a little bit or whatever, right? Because that can happen. So I'm aware of that. Nothing gets past me. I'm going to be honest and confident in saying that. And then she went into sell mode. So I took the time to research the guest that she was trying to get on my podcast. There's nothing wrong with the guest. I'm going to say this. And there's nothing wrong with what she did. I know she's just doing her job. However, what I learned is what I want to share. That's the important nugget here. Is that the guest is actually not a good fit for me and my show. The marketing spin that was around this person's business, and it was marketing spin, how it was put together, marketing 101, and that was fine, but I've already done something like this. So the outcome that she's promising from her marketing is not 100%. It just isn't. And there's more and more of these businesses being created now that I'm in this space, and it has to do with being an author. And I keep seeing this, and you can listen to some other publishers and they'll tell you, like, don't go this route, maybe do it once and then move on and do your own thing, which is what I've done. And I had made that decision before, but it's nice to hear validation from other people. And so the marketing message around what she was going to come on my podcast and talk about does not fit me in my experience and my vibe. I also noticed in her Facebook feed that she does not really promote even her own podcast. She really doesn't promote a lot. Her Facebook feed was just like an average feed. Nothing wrong with it. That's not what I'm saying. Nothing wrong with it. But she wasn't balls to the wall promoting, really putting herself out there, doing Facebook Lives, doing anything. It was just very average, middle of the road. So then if you were going to make the decision to be like, okay, well, maybe the topic doesn't completely jive with me and where I'm at, but she's great at promoting. She'll really help me. She'll help get my message out there to more people. She'll really help grow my audience and share value. That wasn't happening at all. So it just kind of became a really, really strong no for me, a really strong no for me. But here's the thing, people, I took the time to research it. I took the time to research it. I didn't just say yes. I didn't just say no. In fairness, I didn't say no. I was like, I'm going to take the time to research this. And I probably took about, I don't know, definitely 15 minutes, maybe half an hour. So not even that long, really. I was having my cup of coffee and I was like, okay, let's tool around on LinkedIn and Facebook and kind of see what's going on with this person and their business. And again, there's nothing negative about this person and their business. That's not my point. My point is take the time to research to see if what they're selling and what they're obviously going to be promoting on your podcast is a good fit for you energy-wise and your business and your podcast and your audience. And then see if they're going to be a good collaborator and build relationships, because I do think that's important. I do think this training that's going on out there of get on as many podcasts as you can, get on as many podcasts as you can. And I'm seeing it everywhere. I've seen it in masterminds. I was on a webinar. I only stayed on for half an hour because that's what they were doing, is they were like, you're going to grow your business by getting on people's podcasts. And I was like, oh my God, this has got to stop. We've got to start thinking responsibly, doing the research, thinking about our energy, and thinking about what you want to have conveyed to your audience and how you feel about it personally. So that's it. That's a wrap. I hope you like this podcast. Please share with a friend. There's just so much going on out there in this area, in this space of podcasting platforms, however you want to put it, in this lane. And no one's talking about it that in this way. I haven't heard any straight talk about anything like this. Once in a while, I'll hear something, just a nugget, but So if you are a podcaster, you have your own podcast, I hope you like this and can really take it to heart. You might be struggling with some of these things that I've mentioned, and you might be like, oh yeah, this is a time suck. Oh my God. Or my audience isn't growing fast enough, and I'm relying on these podcast guests to do this, or I have bad energy because I'm pissed off that they're not promoting on Facebook, and why aren't they promoting, and no one's giving me reviews. I mean, there's so much energy that gets locked up in this that it's actually kind of crazy, and you can drive yourself nuts. Or if you're a podcast, if you're someone that wants to be on podcasts, do this research, do the due diligence, build a relationship first, show them how you can really help them, and then promote on social media. Don't be this person that doesn't promote. I made 2 mistakes this past fall, 2 mistakes with 2 guests that said they were great at promoting and both sucked. So you know what? It's fine. It was over with. They were decent podcasts. They didn't get great numbers. Maybe it was the energy around it afterwards. Who knows? But you know what? They didn't really do it. And it was my bad because I didn't take the time and really look at their feeds. And one girl isn't even on Facebook or LinkedIn. So that was just stupid on my part. But whatever. It filled the slot, right? So, and hopefully someone gained some value from it, because that's actually how I looked at it first. So I hope you like this podcast. Again, I would love to hear from you. My private one-on-one coaching, which I'm really targeting fixing triggers and mind loops. And if you've been watching my Facebook Lives, I'm talking about it more and more and giving examples. And this podcast itself is a huge example of mind loops and triggers and things that might piss you off and get into your energy. And we need to bust those. We need to move through those. We need to accept certain things about ourselves and stand tall in our power and build that confidence. Because once you start to do that, then you'll start to see that things open up and you'll just feel better. Heck, we all need to be feeling better. This has just been Mr. Toad's wild ride, and we need to be feeling better. So if you need help with triggers and mind loops, please, please, please reach out to me. and we can talk about private coaching. We can see if we're a good fit to work together. And I would love to help you because it's something that I strongly believe in and help a lot of people with, including my husband and even myself. This is obviously one of those podcasts where I'm sharing some examples. So anyhow, please follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram is Melinda_Van Fleet. My other website is goodkarmasuccesscoach.com. And my first book, going to keep talking about it, Confidence Mastery for Couples, comes out March 9th. So until then, thank you so much. And I hope this podcast helps you become more confident. Have a great rest of your week. Bye. Thanks for listening.